Good evening, group. This is Julie Burns, and I'm here to share my integrative case study, Community Church Growing Pains. Community Church is 11 years old in a mid-sized Midwestern community. The church was originally planted as the first in the community from a broader international movement of churches by a young man who had come to faith, been discipled, and eventually was trained in church planning by others within the movement. Pastor Don has said about his early ministry, "I had an irresistible urge to just help out at the church instead of working my regular full-time job. I got a taste for serving the Lord and was hooked. I addicted myself to the ministry of the saints," 1 Corinthians 16:15. The church began in a park shelter with the original group from the fellowship in the cities, whose role was to equip the saints and pass on the baton. The church has rented multiple meeting spaces, with each move prompted by numerical growth. Since its inception, the church grew under this solo pastor. At year 9.5, a children's ministry pastor was called from within based on his faithfulness to the congregation and his love of children to accommodate the rapidly growing children's ministry needs. There are 3 elders in addition to Pastor Don and Pastor Chris. All are Caucasian, male, married, and all are approximately the same age, late 30s to early 40s. Those serving as elders have been personally discipled and trained by Pastor Don through the ministry. The church is made up of folks from nearly all ages, with 2 significant bubbles, those 55 and up, and young families. Most are larger homeschooling families, many of whom are led by men and women who joined as singles or young couples early on. There are many mature believers in terms of biblical knowledge, quite a few with previous ministry experience. Teens are noticeably absent. It is predominantly a white middle-class congregation with a fairly significant divide in relational engagement. Older folks with one another, and younger folks likewise. As an example, the women's retreat led by Pastor Don's wife is almost exclusively led and attended by women 35 and under. 2 years ago, the church experienced a sudden surge of approximately 35 to 50 new attenders for average total attendance now of 200. This represents a newer trend at the church transfer growth instead of conversion growth, partially fueled by the closing of one large evangelical church in the community. The newest attenders claim that they were attracted by the depth of Pastor Don's preaching, and many express a desire to engage with others by using their gifts and experiences. Pastor Don is a gifted teacher, passionately committed to the highest priority in his large church network, which is the systematic preaching of the whole Word of God. Musical worship at the church is simple, unplugged, involving 6 people with musical gifts, several of whom are also elders. The weekend worship format is simple. Pastor Don has primary preaching responsibility, but shares the pulpit about 6 times a year with elders and guests. Formal communication about church life occurs on Sunday mornings only. In addition to weekly corporate worship, Pastor Don has occasionally taught Wednesday night Bible study. He created a daily devotional teaching series on the internet with international impact. The church has a few small groups that meet in people's homes. On a recent Sunday morning, Pastor Don gave an altar call and left space for reflection and response. At the close of the service, he said, "If you have made a significant spiritual decision to follow Christ today, I would be happy to disciple you as you get started on the journey." At a newcomers gathering after one Sunday service, Elder Tom shared, "We need children's ministry workers and we need help with setup and takedown for weekend worship services." One young woman, Kathy, inquired about small groups. Elder Tom said, "Feel free to start one." Another church leader said, "We are looking for people with servants' hearts. Anyone who wants to serve can start by helping set up chairs for Sunday worship. You are welcome to come join us for that." Kathy attempted on Sunday mornings to recruit women for a study and could only find one woman interested. They began to meet weekly in a one-on-one context and eventually gave up meeting together as arranging for their meetings became too complex. Jenny, who was also present at the newcomer meeting, reached out on Sunday mornings to a couple familiar faces from the pews. Each of these women said, "My husband and I are already in a group." Kathy and Jenny's opposite life schedules prevented teaming up. When Sam, a regular attender of 18 months and potential pastoral intern, requested a meeting with Pastor Don, he happily responded to inquiries about the congregation's story and plan for growth. "We don't have a plan. All along I have told people that I am just holding on for the ride, and I am nearly always breathless trying to keep up with what he is doing. God has blessed, our job is to be faithful, and he will bring people in conversions." In response to some previous Sunday announcements about hopes of starting more small groups, Sam inquired, "I have some significant background and passion for small group leadership, recruiting, training, and coaching. Would there be a way I could serve you in community church to assist with the launch of new groups? Pastor Don replied, "We don't train small group leaders here. If someone is called to do it, she's welcome to find some people and start a group. If it goes well, then she will know she has the gift. If not, it will fail, and she'll figure out that it's not her gift." In a conversation during a worship service very recently, one person in attendance for about 24 months shrugged her shoulders and said to another relative newcomer, "Have you figured out how to get in?" "Me neither." How will community church retain new attenders? How will community church grow? There are abundant opportunities at community church, but there are a number of questions wrapped up in these opportunities. How will the church retain these many newcomers? What about church growth? And it appears there's untapped potential sitting in the pews week after week. What about unidentified hindrances to growth and integration, or the possibility of some dangerous blind spots? To come at this case, I started with biblical and theological angles. What might the scriptures and ecclesiology have to offer to community church on the issues of a spirit of welcome and hospitality? In an intersection with the social science and ethical discussions, what are the avenues in at community church? Is community church for those already on the inside or for those on the outside trying to enter in? How does a newcomer get in? I think there are some potential resources that could be used for this exploration. One of those is the Theology for the Community of God textbook by Stanley Grenz. He says, to be effective in carrying out its purposes, every human community must organize itself. Community organization includes practices of commitment, which integrate new members into the body and provide opportunities for members to reaffirm their loyalty to the corporate vision. Organization includes likewise the development of structures within the community. Ultimately, the goal of such structures is to facilitate community life. Another resource would be One Size Doesn't Fit All by Gary McIntosh. He says, as a general rule, during the first 7 to 10 years of a church's lifespan, it has good success at reaching, attracting, and assimilating newcomers. However, the longer a church remains small and the longer it is in existence, the more ingrown fellowship structures become. The normal fellowship structures, groups, classes, circles, become so full that they can no longer absorb outsiders. I'm anxious to see what these authors offer. Another biblical theological angle that I think merits some exploration are these questions. What does the Bible have to say to the church about the relationships between the generations? What about the engagement between older and younger Christ followers? And how might community church mine the riches that are now sitting in the pews each and every week? Again, some potential resources. Here I look primarily to the scriptures, 1 Corinthians 12 and 13, where Paul speaks to the desires of those within the church for the gifts of the Spirit, and what a beautiful desire that is, but that the even higher calling is to love and serve one another. From Titus 2, I wonder how might Paul's instructions regarding the relational engagement among those in the early church inform the relationships at community church, which are not currently demonstrations of mutual respect and admiration. Likewise, I would like to look at some models from the scriptures, which include but are not limited to Barnabas and Paul, Paul and Timothy, and Lois and Eunice with their grandson and son Timothy. How might we benefit, or how might community church benefit from considering these biblical passages and models when it comes to passing the faith on to the next generation? Then I am considering a social science angle of leadership. And this case is loaded with leadership angles, but I'm going to zero in here on a couple. What might leadership theory contribute to the new challenges of growth that are being faced at community church? As community church sits on the threshold of becoming a medium-sized church from its formerly small-sized church status, are there differing theories and philosophies of ministry that would benefit them at this critical time? Potential resources here that I could see would be the book of Acts. So in an intersection with biblical and theological issues, this book of Acts is a biblical history of early church growth. And I believe it could be expected to reveal helpful insights on leadership for the church at various ages, stages, and sizes. How might leadership change and adapt to their growing and changing congregational needs? Again, Gary McIntosh's book, One Size Doesn't Fit All, would be immensely helpful here. McIntosh says we cannot cause growth, we can only create a climate in which growth can take place. He also says all churches have a central organizing principle or orientation. In the small church, the organizing principle is a relational orientation. He goes on to discuss how that changes as we move up in size and grow as a church. Another social science angle that intrigues me is that of formation, one of my major heartbeats in life. While it appears that Pastor Don has been investing in a small circle faithfully, is there a vision for making and reproducing disciples for the church as a whole? Is someone besides Pastor Don charged with reproducing disciples? How is the church intentionally forming all its peoples into followers of Jesus Christ? Do they have a cycle of reproduction and multiplication in mind as the number of attenders continues to go up? These questions also form connection with the leadership angle. Is leadership also invested in growth, replication, and multiplication? Or is discipleship and leadership development primarily focused instead on addition as opposed to multiplication? There are a number of excellent resources that be considered here. I've named 4 that I'm excited about pursuing a little more carefully. In the book Leadership, Nordhaus offers some insights regarding situational leadership, which informs us that different situations demand different kinds of leadership. To be an effective leader requires that a person adapt his or her style to the demands of differing situations. This model has been adapted frequently and loosely as the pattern I do, you watch, we do together, you do, I watch, and then you do, I alone. You do alone, excuse me. Then there are the Gospels. I believe in the Gospels, Jesus provides us an excellent model of reproductive disciple making as he guides his disciples toward maturity. And part of that is being fruitful and reproductive themselves under the mandate of Matthew 28:18 through 20. As you are going, make disciples by baptizing and teaching to obey everything he has commanded. Third, I've identified the Master Plan of Evangelism, a classic by Robert E. Coleman that addresses the folly of addition in the church versus multiplication as the means of building God's church in the world. And lastly, at this point, I've identified The Critical Journey by Janet Hagberg and Robert Gielick. This has been a significant formative influence in my understanding of formation. This has the potential to bring some very fresh perspective on the various growth and community experiences that might be needed by various people at different ages and stages in the journey toward Christ-likeness that are sitting in the rows at Community Church. Finally, I've listed my bibliography of potential resources, and I'll just say that I look forward very much to engaging with you and my group on your observations from the case and some additional areas for fruitful exploration. Thank you for listening.